So I'm going to share my screen. Cool. I'm really used to running this session live. So if anyone wants to participate, at least the people who are hosting, if you want to participate, please feel free. And please, anyone who is part of the webinar, do use the chat, yes, to kind of, yes, sorry, not this, done this slideshow. That's it. Let's start. Okay, so I'm not going to reintroduce myself. Katarina has done a wonderful job. It is always a little weird when someone else is introducing you, but that's wonderful, beautiful to hear. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to reset your mind and body and really share with you more like practical tools on how to deal with stress and traumatic experience. So for some of you, what I'm going to explain might be very obvious and you might already know through your work, but I think it's always good to go back to the foundation a little bit, to the basis of the stress system and why do we react the way we react when we're getting stressed and when we're going through difficult experience. Yes. So I'm going to explain the stress system and I'm going to talk to you about what to do next, and specifically in three areas: the triggers, the thoughts, and your feelings and reaction about it. So again, this is very practical. This is for you to kind of understand what to do, but please share, please feel free to kind of comment, use the chat and all of that. Yes. So I'm going to pass this because Katarina had done a wonderful job. So here we are. And so, yes, we believe at the Reset Health Group that you have the power and resources to manage your well-being. And this is the physical well-being and the mental well-being. But years of urban living and neglect and stressful experiences has led us to kind of to a road of dissatisfaction and dysregulation. And we have forgotten we can regulate ourselves a little. So today we kind of, I want to help you to reset, so then you can really take that to your workplace and try to implement those techniques to manage the stress you are going through on a day-to-day basis. So what is the stress system? So the stress system first is triggered by a perception of an event and not the event itself. Okay, and when you perceive a threat, then you're going to trigger what we call the flight, fight, and freeze mode, right? So the stress system kind of starts from like behind your ears. There is this limbic system, and from that part of your brain, you're going to trigger a chain of reaction in your whole body that is going to release the stress hormone in your blood flow in order to allow you to be ready for the threat in front of you. So most of us have heard that words flight and fight mode, and we understand that when we perceive a threat, we then get ready to run or get ready to fight, right? So in details, that's kind of what happened in your body. So you release the stress hormone in your blood flow, and the blood is going to be redirected to your muscles in order to prepare you to get the strength or the energy to run or fight, right? Your heart rate is going to increase. Like right now, for instance, for me, presenting is triggering my stress system, so I can see my heart rate going a little faster. And then because the blood flow is being redirected into the body, I feel a little hot right now. The other thing that happens is in order to redirect the blood flow to your muscle for you to be ready to fight, the blood flow needs to come from somewhere else. The energy needs to come from somewhere else. So it's mean that other part of your body is going to be put on standby. And those parts of the body are, for instance, the immune system is going to slow down. Your digestive system is going to slow down as well. And so I think you can relate to that in the way that most of us, when we feel stress, we feel a little bit the stress in our stomach. We feel this butterfly feeling in the stomach, right? And so this is because the blood is being redirected. And at this moment in time, your brain is sending the message that it is not really urgent for you to digest your food. What is urgent is maybe for you to run away because the lion is coming to eat you, right? And the same for your immune system. If at that moment you have a virus, your brain is going to say, well, actually dealing with a virus is not as urgent as dealing with a lion that is in front of you. So I'm going to take the energy from your immune system and send it to your muscle. And so you are ready to run away. But other things will happen that we might be less aware of, is your brain functioning is going to change as well. So we know it's triggering the stress hormone in your body, right? So that it's going in your blood flow. But what will happen as well is your rational mind, which is more part of your prefrontal brain, is also going to be altered, because at that moment in time, your brain doesn't really want you to think too much, right? It needs you to kind of act very fast. So it doesn't really want you to ponder on things. It doesn't want you to think too much about things, to contemplate life. It wants you to act. So it's mean at the moment where your stress system is being triggered because you've perceived a threat, your rational mind is also going to kind of slow down or almost be switched off. So I think most of us can also relate to that when we were under stress and we've done something, and the day after we deeply regret it because, God, why did we do that? Why did we send that email? Why did we talk about these things? Why did we use those words? So most of us can, say maybe the wrong things when we are under stress because of that reason, because the brain functioning changed, because your brain doesn't want you to think too much. And again, to illustrate that, I'm going to give you an example. If you are about to cross the road and there is a car coming, the last thing that you want is that you are thinking too much about the car is coming, right? You want to be able to jump back on the pavement very fast. If the rational mind was actually in charge at that moment, you would probably see the car coming and you would be like, oh, what make is this car? What color is this car? Oh, I wonder if I could get that car. You would be like wondering and pondering and contemplating on things. And by the time you finish that, then the car would have run you over, right? So then you really want to be able to just have an instinct to jump back. Okay. Yes. So I'm going back to the stress system and what triggers your stress system here. Very important, because this is the start of everything. So it is not an event that is making us feel, but it's our perception of the event. So it's the way we interpret the world that is going to trigger our stress. So it means that we can all go through the exact same situation, but because we're not perceiving the world the same way, we'll not feel the same way about it. And this is where I would really like you, if you can, to kind of share in the chat. I have a very silly example to give you, but I think it is a good example to just illustrate how we might perceive the world in a different way. So if I give you a crisp sandwich, how would you feel? So if you could share in the chat, that would be great. Just that little event of being given like a crisp sandwich to eat for your lunch today. Well, nights would be more like breakfast, maybe still for me, but yes. How would you feel if someone gave you a crisp sandwich? I'm going to just give a minute to see if people are able to write it down in the chat. However, I can't see the chat, I think. I don't know if someone can help me with that.
Sure. Yeah. We've got a range of different answers, from nostalgic, disappointed, sad, brilliant childhood memory of a treat, disgusted, disgust, grossed out, terribly tempted, but probably not eating it, unsatisfied. I would be quite happy, almost a treat.
Thank you very much for that. That's lovely. Okay, so when I ask this question to most of my clients, I work in the UK. So most of my clients are British, and most people in the UK, when I ask them that question, they do have that feeling of happiness. It's nostalgia from childhood, as someone mentioned. They have a positive feeling. It's comfort food for them. Now, I offered a crust sandwich to my dad. I am French. He's very French, very traditional. His feeling was he was horrified. He was horrified. He asked me if I forgot to do my grocery shopping. He told me that I spent too much time in the UK. I need to go back to France to learn how to eat properly. And so that wasn't the effect I wanted to have, but that was very interesting. So the same event, and you can see from that event, we're not feeling at all the same way about it. And the reason we're not feeling the same way about it is because we're not perceiving the crust sandwich in the same way. And in that example, you can also see how the culture and your past experience is influencing the way you are seeing the world. I am 100% sure that if my dad had grown up in the UK, he would have loved the crust sandwich because he actually loved all those things, right? But because this is something that is very out of his comfort zone or out of his norm, then he's like feeling a little bit weird about it, right? So you can see that the perception is going to actually trigger your feelings here. Okay, yes. So this is how your stress system and how, the traumatic system, like the trauma system, is the same. This is how the stress system work. There is a trigger, there is an event, you perceiving that event in a certain way, therefore you feel, and then depending on those feelings and the intensity of those feelings, then you're going to react or behave in a certain way. So if I go back to my dad here, like his feelings about it were like he was a bit disappointed, he didn't understand why I was giving him that, so he sighed and he asked me to have something else for food. But if, for instance, he was very, very strict on tradition or very, very strict on what is the right things to eat according to his French culture, then maybe his feeling would have been much higher, and then maybe he would have thrown the plate at me, for instance, right? So you can see how your feelings is going to influence how you're going to behave, right? You can see how actually there is a direct link as well between feelings and reaction. Now, I really want to go back to what David was saying earlier in his talk. I thought that was very interesting. He was saying that some people, depending on his colleagues, who they are and all of that, they can work with some client and other client they couldn't work with. I think his colleagues could work maybe with sex offenders and other colleagues couldn't work with sex offenders. And this is why, because depending on your perception of the world and maybe your past experience, some clients you're going to work with or some documents you're going to read about trauma or things like that are going to resonate with you and your story much more than others, right? So it is not the trigger, but it's your perception of that trigger that is going to make you feel. I cannot say it enough, because at the moment you understand that, then you understand how unique we all are. And there is not right or wrong reaction to events around us. It is all depending on our experiences. So because I have gone through that a lot with the nurses at the hospital, they didn't understand why some of them could work with very difficult clients, and others felt they couldn't face it, and they felt very inadequate because of it. But actually none of them were right or wrong. It is all about your experience, and then after that it is all about your ability, how you've learned to deal with your emotion, to cope with your emotion. And again, those two things are things that we learn, right? We are not born with an emotional system in place. Like, when I believe we are one of the only species to actually be completely be incomplete when we are born. We are born and we can't really actually manage our emotion. We need our parent to teach us how to manage our emotions. So we're going to learn how to manage our emotions the same way that we're also going to learn how to interpret the world. So those things are very unique to us, right? But it doesn't mean that it cannot be changed. Okay. Again, any question, do not hesitate. Yes. So what to do next? I hope that was, I tried to keep it simple Also, I'm aware of the time. So then what to do next? So once you understand that actually the stress system and what is going to lead you to feel that an experience is traumatic or stressful is linked to your perception of that event, and then linked to how you've learned to cope with emotion in your life, right? So once you know that, then you can start implementing a better way to cope with stressful, difficult experience. So the first things to look at will be triggers, right? Is understand what trigger us, because this is very personal to us. So we need to start kind of gaining self-awareness. And then we'll look at perception, so how our mind interprets the world. So again, this is very unique to us. So it's very important to kind of try to take a step back and reflect on this. And then we'll work on the emotion and reaction, how once we have been triggered and once the stress is there, what do we do with it? Okay. Yes. So what does trigger your stress system? And Joanne, if anyone could like share again in the chat what they are aware might trigger them. So what could trigger your stress system could be anything from like emails to maybe the kids, to maybe your husband, to maybe deadline. I don't know, but it would be great to know what in your case, guys, what do you feel do trigger your stress system on a daily basis? What does trigger your stress system? What awareness do you have? And I'm going to give 1 or 2 minutes for anyone who would like to share. I can say doing a webinar does trigger my stress system.
Do you need me to read them out to you again?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got a couple that have come in. Children's birthday parties, time pressure, fear of failure, lack of control, travel, driving, having too many things to remember, car sirens in traffic, having too many or additional things to do that aren't in my timetable or that aren't previously planned, certain doubts and having to decide on them, conflict, my mother visiting.
Love it. That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, so what does trigger our stress system? So first, we can kind of categorize all those triggers into 3 areas: the mind, the body, and the environment. So what is related to the mind is really related to what is coming our way and we perceive it, like our mind interprets it as a threat, right? So emails, a lot of you talked about, emails, birthday party. There was a lot of things regarding work, deadline, and all of that, I think. Anything related to, you know, your family, all of that. But it's very, I would say it's quite important to just notice it. And the reason why I'm going to explain after why, but at least notice it, because yeah, then you can do something with it, basically, right? But if you don't start noticing it, it's going to surprise you next time it happens, and you're not going to be prepared for it. So the second type of trigger that we notice is the one that are happening in the body. So they are not really dependent on other people's reactions, behavior. It's more how we look after ourselves, right? So lack of sleep is going to trigger your stress system. When you are sleep deprived, you're much more likely to see things in black and white, to overreact to things, to be snappy. You're likely to be more emotional, more sad, or more angry. So it's very important to be mindful of that, right? Because if you start your day being sleep deprived, and then you have something else in the day, like a deadline to finish, something like that, your stress level is already quite high, and then adding something else on the top is making things, you know, it's making you going out of your zone of tolerance very fast. And that doesn't mean that, I hope I'm not making anyone think, oh my God, my day is going to be terrible today because I'm already sleep deprived. It's more like when you know that, what are you going to do today to kind of manage your stress little by little? So by the end of the day, you're not completely overwhelmed. Yeah. The other things to be mindful of is hunger. So in English, you have this wonderful expression, which is to be hungry. So you can notice that when you are hungry, you can really quickly go into your stress system by being more snappy. You know, you're more snappy, you are more emotional about things. So that's a sign that you are in your stress system. Then sensory overload in general, when there's too much noise around you, someone say about also the siren and things like that, the noise around you, all of that can be very triggering for your brain, right? The third trigger is the environment, and that's more like now there's a lot of study and research that's been done on like people who are hoarding. You know, it does too much stimulation, too much things around you is leading to too much stimulation, and your brain cannot process, and therefore is triggering the stress system. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to try to move a bit faster. I hope that's okay. Yes.
We have one question.
Yes.
In your slide, you put sensory overload with body, but you put noise with environment. Can you say a little bit more about that separation? Thank you.
Yes, it's actually, there's no separation. It is the same things, but I think what's important is that it is part of the environment and the body. So in the work I do, we do not really separate mind, body, and environment, and you will see that everything overlap. But when I put environment here, I'm talking about people who are hoarding. So really, like, look at your environment. And sensory overload, it's sometimes just feeling too many things at the same time inside your body is a stress for your body. Yeah, I hope that. So it's very good point. It is not so easy to separate things into category when everything is actually connected inside you, right? So, but the bottom line here is that we need to get to know how we work, because all those triggers are very personal to us. They are unique to us. It depends of our past experience. So it's really important to kind of start noticing what does trigger you, because what's trigger you is going to be unique to you, and the only way to work on it is to be aware of it. Okay, so next slide. Yes. So why, if tomorrow I tell you that you have to drive to where I think David is in Scotland, you are not just going to turn up there, right? You're going to get your Google map out, most of you, and you will check how you get there, right? You will actually maybe also check for traffic, you will check for the weather, and you will check for the weather because you need to also wear the appropriate clothes. So why is it important to notice your triggers? Because it is, although avoidance can be a great coping strategy, it is not helpful to put your head in the sand. If you know that in general, you are someone who get quite easily stressed by work deadline, for instance, it is not about avoiding them, and it is not about putting your head in the sand thinking that it will not happen again, because it's very likely in our in modern life that you will get work deadline. It's more about how you're going to prepare yourself for it. By knowing your trigger, you can learn to prepare yourself for it. So if you know, for instance, that driving is a trigger for you, what are you going to do to prepare yourself for that trigger, right? So that will be things like, how are you going to relax? How are you going to bring your stress level down? So when you get into the car, at least your stress level is not too high, for instance. Okay. Yes. So the type of things, the type of thing to take into consideration to prepare yourself better is to be mindful of your morning routine, for instance, because if you start your day already stressed, then with a little thing that are going to happen through your day, you're going to be, by lunchtime, you're going to be out of your zone of tolerance and you're going to feel overwhelmed. So can you spend more time in the morning to get ready, to take your time instead of rushing? Can you maybe have a good breakfast so you're not hungry at 10 a.m. and feeling like, oh my God, I don't know, I can't cope anymore? Can you take the time to do some meditation to really lower your stress system? Can you take several breaks during the day to really kind of, again, lower your stress system? can you practice regular physical exercise, because that really helps to regulate your stress system. And there's a lot of technique like that. Again, because I have to be fast, I'm going to go a little bit quicker on this, but do not hesitate to ask questions at the end. Now we move on to the next thing. So once you've managed your triggers, or you are aware of your triggers, what we have mentioned, as what I have mentioned over and over, is it is not the event that is going to make you feel, it's your perception of that event. Therefore, being aware of your trigger is not going to be to do all the job here, right? Because actually the trigger is not that important. What is important is how you are going to think about it. And so the mind here is sending so much instruction, information to your body. And most of the time, most of us don't realize what we are thinking. And so there is a massive difference in between what's really happening, the fact, and your perception of the event, right? And again, that's in very common sense, but it's very important to remember that, because when I used to work with the nurses at the hospital, that was most of the work we would do when we would do debrief after a very difficult and traumatic incident on the ward and the psychiatric unit. This would be to help them to make the difference in between what has happened and what their brain is saying, right? Because that difference here is going to trigger the stress system, helping the brain to understand actually the way you're perceiving it might not be exactly what has happened. It will actually help the brain to switch off the stress system. So how you're perceiving the world is going to really trigger, this is going to really be important here. It's really important to be more curious about your thought, to be more mindful of your thoughts, so then you can change them. The challenge is when, because we don't know what we are thinking, we can't change it. Okay, so there is psychologists that have studied, like looked into our way of thinking, and they have noticed that we often fall in what we call cognitive distortion. So what it means is when your brain is trying to make sense of the world around you, it's going to often use shortcuts, and that would lead you to misinterpret the world around you. Your brain doesn't always take the time to take in the full information of the situation, and it will just take a little bit of information, and it will refer back to your library of knowledge, all the experiences you've been through in your life, and it will jump into conclusion. And although that's very helpful when you are in distress and because you need to think fast, when we are going through life, it is not very helpful because we're making a lot of mistake in our perception of the world, and all of us, right? So, for instance, you might be thinking in all or nothing thinking, or you might be jumping into conclusion. You might use the word should quite a lot. Should is, for instance, an arbitrary statement that has nothing to do with really what's happening around us. It has to do with what we've learned. So again, we go back to experience here. You might be magnifying the negative and really dismissing the positive. When we are under stress, we tend to catastrophize things. So I don't know if you can relate to any of that. Again, if any comment about that, put it in the chat. I would be happy to kind of answer any of your question at the end. But that's very important to start noticing. If you're noticing that you are thinking with should statement or always or never, it is good to start to kind of challenge your thoughts a little, right? Yes. So your thoughts are a product of your brain activity. They are not you. We make this mistake in Western society, is really we identify with the way we think. We believe that that inner voice is us, and therefore it must be right in some ways. It is very important to dissociate that voice is a product of our brain activity, and sometimes the brain activity that is taking over is our survival system, and the rational mind is kind of switched off. And therefore, we're making decisions very emotional based on those emotional thoughts. Yeah, so challenge your thinking with kindness and compassion. When you find yourself being distressed, maybe talk to yourself. I know I'm saying that to you. Talk to yourself at the third person. That sounds a little crazy, but it's actually very effective. You can cope with whatever come your way. You know, this kind of sentences where you keep on repeating that to yourself. You can do it. You know, you can achieve this thing. This is fine. You know, all of those sentences can be very helpful. Changing the word that you use. There is a wonderful YouTube video from Carol Dweck called The Power of Yet, where she's showing how by just using the word yet in your sentence, in your inner thoughts, you can really change the way you are feeling about things. So instead of saying to yourself, I can't do something, you could say, I can't do something yet. And the feeling you have from that just simple word is really going to change the feeling that you have. Okay. Try to let go of the word never or always, because those ones are going to lead you to think in black and white, and that things are absolute, right? Try to change the word should for the word could, because then it's kind of help you to add more flexibility in your thoughts. So right now, I should be quicker doing that presentation. No, I could be quicker doing this presentation. When I say to myself, I should be quicker, I'm judging myself and I'm making myself feel inadequate. When I say to myself, I could be quicker, I am much more compassionate and less judgmental, right? Okay, we have to move on. Okay, so the molecules of emotions must flow. That is very important. So emotion are molecule, like they are stress hormone, for instance, right? And we need to release them somehow. So we need to somehow do something that allow us to get rid of it, right? And that can be just that simple movement. That can be a sigh, or that can be yelling at someone, or that can be, you know, when people get physically violent. Anything like that is a release. Obviously, we want the release to be healthy and safe. So this is why it's very important to, during the day, to keep on trying to releasing our emotion. So then by the end of the day, you don't end up out of your zone of tolerance where you don't feel like you can think rationally anymore, because then at that point, your release will be more unhealthy and less safe, right? So you really, that's when you snap at your partner by the end of the day, basically, right? So you really want to kind of release your stress, release your emotion for the day. I wonder if, Joanne, we have a little bit of time to ask people what they do to release their emotions. Yes. So if people could put in the chat what do they do to release their stress, release their emotions for the day, at the end of the day.
Oh, we're getting lots. Hang on, let me back up to find them. Walk my dog, talk to my partner, play music, watch TV, walk in nature. Not sure that I do. Mindful meditation, body scan, mindful breathing. I stroke and cuddle my cat. The sound of purring just warms my heart. On good days, go for a run. On bad days, shout at my kids, lift weights, drum, film night, intense exercising.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'm going to pass it. Okay, what do you do? So meditation, singing, humming is also very good because it's triggered your rest system. I want to just mention that David mentioned that earlier. Your rest system, is like your stress system. It needs to be actively triggered. So when you sit in front of the TV, it is not triggering your rest system. It is not helping you to relax. It only helps you to relax if you are fully engaging with the activity, if you are actively engaging with the activity. So if you're watching TV and you're actively in it, yes, that's great. If you are watching TV, but you are thinking about work, no, you're not engaging your rest system, you're not triggering your relaxing mode, right? And it's very important to, so whatever you do, guys, what is important is to be actively engaging with it. So things like singing, meditation, and things like that does kind of trigger what we call the vagus nerve, and it does help you to actively trigger your rest system. Things like talking, so what, if you haven't read that book, the Chimp Management or Chimp Paradox books is very good. It's helping you to understand your stress system. But walking, you say walking your chimps, just basically empty your bucket, talk to people, but talk to people who can also not wind you up with more negative thoughts, right? That's really important. Things like cold exposure, you won't believe it, but actually having a cold shower will trigger your rest system. Breath work, but in that case, maybe Wim Hof breathing. If you probably have seen it on TV, but Wim Hof breathing can really allow you to release the molecule of emotions. That's quite good. Walk in nature, some people talked about that. Physical exercise, great. So much more to say. Yes, I would be there for. I'm going to finish on this slide and allow people to ask questions. What's really important, guys, is no matter what you do, is practice makes perfect. Like, we have these wonderful things called neuroplasticity. So your brain has the ability to regenerate and reconnect neurons and learn new things all the time. But in order to do that, you do need to practice it. So nothing is going to happen tomorrow. Like me doing this talk is not going to change that much. What is important is that you keep on repeating the right thing for you, and then it will work. So repetition is going to be key here for neuroplasticity. I went slightly over time by 15 minutes. I am very sorry. I hope if anyone has any question, I'm aware that I try to say a lot in a short amount of time. So yes.